Christian parenting.
This is Cynthia Yanoff, and you're listening to Pardon the Mess. Each week we have honest discussions about the ups and downs of parenting and the lessons God is teaching us along the way. It's real, it's fun, and it's biblical. Life is messy. Don't walk the parenting road alone. Hey guys, welcome to Pardon the Mess. I hope you are having a great week. I'm glad you're with us today because we have Sheila Walsh on. And Sheila was on our podcast about 6 months ago talking about her book, Praying Women. And then today we're talking about her book, Praying Girls. And I assure you, as a mother of 2 boys, there is also plenty in this conversation that will help you in praying for and with your sons. But what I love is how vulnerably she talks about things she knows now that she wished she would have known as a child. And we kind of talk about those things in our own lives and how maybe we can help our kids learn those earlier than we did. And also how prayer works with that, with those hard places we face. How do we help our kids turn to prayer in it? And so I always love talking to her, especially about prayer, because she is a prayer warrior. And she just always reminds me of the importance of having a dialogue with the Lord just all day about everything. And so on that note, I have a friend, and I may have mentioned this before, but humor me. I have a friend whose mom, every time they go anywhere, she prays like the whole time, but out loud. She's like, "Oh, we're at the mall. Please help us find a parking place, God. Oh, we need a table for lunch. Can you help us with this, Lord?" And how my friend and I used to kind of giggle about it, but then she would always find the parking place, or it always kind of went her way. And so the other night I was driving in a really hard part of town to find parking places. And I literally out loud was with my kids in the car, "Lord, help me find a parking place." And I mean, right then the parking place opened up, and I just chuckled somewhere in between thinking, well, that's sweet of God, but also my kids are going to think I'm that crazy lady that's praying for parking places and lunch reservations. But it is a practical reminder of how important it is to pray over all things, pray without ceasing. And so that's why I'm glad Sheila's here. She will encourage you, build you up, and really help you as you parent your kids through prayer. Here we go. All right, Sheila Walsh, welcome back to Pardon the Mess. How are you?
I'm good, and it's so good to be with you again. You're like my buddy up the street. We don't live so far apart.
We don't. We're neighbors. And so I'm glad to have you back. So before we kick anything off, Pardon the Mess, we're all about just messy things in life. So I was going to just start off with a parenting fail to share with you. I don't know why, Sheila, I feel compelled to have like these confessionals once in a while, but I'm going to today. So here we are. We're still dealing with COVID, right? I mean, still dealing with COVID. Okay. And so I have a preschooler and among other kids. And this morning he woke up and he coughed a couple of times. And of course, I reacted to the cough. I'm like, oh, whatever. I don't know what I said. Well, that age, then they like the fake cough. So he's coughing up, all over our house this morning. He's, and so I finally was like, hey, listen, a lot of people are sick, and I'm trying to explain. So we're not going to cough. Okay. We don't cough. And I'm listening to myself saying, like, telling him not to cough. And so that's kind of the end of the discussion. So I go drop him off at school, and they pull him out of the car seat, and they're taking his temperature. And he says to the teacher, "I got a really bad cough, but my mom said no coughing." I was like, brilliant. Great, really bad cough, but my mom said no coughing. I was like, oh, for the love. Now, for everyone listening, you can save the emails. I assure you, I don't think the child has a cough. I think he was faking. But nonetheless, that was my parenting fail of the morning. So I thought, let's just start off with that so everybody knows we're on equal failing footing on any given day. So share with us one of your parenting fails. I know you've got an older son now, but I'm sure you've got plenty of fails still that have happened.
Oh, how long do we have? Yes, lots of fails. Okay, the one that immediately springs to mind is the morning that I lied to my child, but it kept going. He had this betta, this fish that he called Red, and he loved this fish. And one morning I get up and Red's floating. So I think, oh gosh, What do I do? Because he was young. So I flushed Red down the toilet, said one verse of Amazing Grace, and he was gone. And then when I wrote a note and sat it by the fishbowl. And so Christian got up and he looked and he's like, "Mom, where's Red?" And I was like, "I don't know." Because I didn't know. I don't know where the toilet goes. Red could be anywhere. But then I said, "But look, there's a note." And so he picked out a note. And this is what I had written: "To my darling son, dear Christian, I loved being with you. You're amazing. But I got this great offer to be a fish in the circus in New York. So I'm off. And the only thing that Christian said to me, he kind of paused for a minute and then he looked at me and he said, I knew that fish would make it.
That's awesome. I knew that fish would make it.
So then I brought all my friends in on the lie. So the next time Lucy Swindoll's in New York, I'm getting her to send a postcard from Red just saying, having a great time in the Big Apple. Oh, yeah. It was like, I called the sinning of many people.
And so for all we know at this point, Red is maybe in Hamilton, according to your son. I don't know. He's been in Hamilton.
I have a sneaking suspicion he's an extra in Hamilton.
That's awesome. Well, that makes me laugh. Thank you for sharing that. And so whoever's listening that's thinking, I'm not getting it right, don't worry. None of us are getting it right. And that's probably like the G-rated of both of our stories. I'm sure we have lots of others, but there you go. And so speaking of not feeling like you're getting it right, I love that you talk about your new book that you have out. And you and I talked about, I don't know how long ago, 6 months ago or something, about your book, Praying Women. But this Praying Girls book, you've talked about how this came from a place where you were assessing your spiritual life and you're like, I'm just not doing it well in terms of prayer. And I think some of the strongest things I've written or, the places where the Lord's spoken most through me are places where also for myself have been my biggest weaknesses. And in fact, I even have written a prayer journal that we go through during the school year because I don't pray well for my kids. And so I just love that your honesty in saying that was kind of one of the places where you struggled. Can you just share a little bit about that and kind of where the struggle is and how you've worked through it?
You know, it's really interesting because when I never intended Praying Women to be like a published book. It was simply like a research thing for myself because I remember asking the Holy Spirit one morning, you know, I feel like I'm kind of struggling or kind of dry. And I'm wondering like where I should kind of be paying attention. And I felt really clearly it was like, because I love Bible study. That's my hobby. I love to dive deep and unpack words. And I love speaking to women. That is my passion. But I felt like my prayer life was really weak. So I did as much study as I could. And then one night, you know, I threw it out on Facebook. If I say the word prayer, what comes to mind? And I got, you know, answers like, I get bored. I feel like I'm just repeating myself. Or some that were a little heavier, like I prayed for my child not to die and he died. Mm-hmm. Or why keep praying if God already knows what he's going to do? So I realized it wasn't just my issue, like a lot of women, but it was when I was in the audio booth recording the audio version of the book that it really struck me, because I would come to passages and thought, oh, wow, I wish I'd known this when I was 10 or 11. Mm-hmm. Because I remembered the shame I felt when I had the wrong dress for the school dance. I remember so much. I remember when I was being bullied at school, but didn't think I could tell anybody because I thought the bullying will get worse if I tell anybody. And so that's really why I wrote Praying Girls, because I wanted girls to know at an early age, you can talk to God about anything, that you're not alone. I mean, Hebrews 13 says, you know, God said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. But it was more a kind of cry of my heart to let our girls know they can actually be authentic with God. They don't have to try and muster up a holy prayer. They can come with the words that are inside them.
Okay, and so I want to jump on that for just a minute, and we're going to talk a lot about prayer. We're getting there, but I want to go back to this for a minute. You're talking about that's something you wish you would have known as a girl. And so I have a senior in high school daughter right now, and so I'm working through my first one going to college next year. And so I had that same sentiment you did. There's so many things that I wish I would have known at her age, but sometimes it's hard to hear it all from your mom. And so this year, what I've done, and there's a point to this, but I've asked one woman specifically a month, her entire senior year, to pray over her and then feed into her an attribute that I think that woman is strong in. So for example, this month, I have a friend who's very discerning and just has a really strong heart for discerning God in people's lives. And I've asked her to pray over my daughter this year and then talk to her about what it means to have discernment in your life. And then next month, we're going to do someone that's really strong in hospitality and also has suffered a big loss. Anyway, my point in doing that is I think we all have these places in our life where we just wish we would have known. And so one of yours is prayer, but can we just talk for a minute about a couple of those places in our lives that we wish that we would have known as young adults that now we know. Can we talk through a few of those? Because I think that will help people listening to say, I hadn't thought about that, or I thought maybe we all knew that, and places that we can speak these truths into our kids. And so let's just talk about a couple of those before we get more into prayer, if you don't mind.
No, I think that's brilliant. And by the way, what a fantastic idea to
Oh,
ask
thank you.
women. I mean, that's brilliant because you're right. We're all strong in different areas and weak in certain areas. But one of the things that I learned later in life is, when I think you and I've talked about this, but when I was 34, my life kind of crashed. I had a nervous breakdown and I ended up in a psych hospital. And my therapist on like week 3 asked, is there any way because my father had committed suicide when I was 5. And he said, is there any way your mom would come over and join us in some sessions? And I said, honestly, I have no idea, but I'll ask her. So my mom said yes. So I flew her over from Scotland to the hospital in Washington, D.C. And I will never, ever forget that first morning when my therapist asked my mom something about my father's deteriorating mental health before he tried to kill me and then killed himself. And I was suddenly aware of this. It sounded like a wounded animal that had been caught in a trap. And I turned and it was my mom. And what I learned that morning was that for years, for all my life and up until that point, I thought it was my fault. And for all that time, my mom thought it was her fault. And we'd never talked about my father's suicide since the day he died. And one of the things I would say to parents is sometimes we think we want to protect our kids from the hard stuff, but sometimes what they're imagining is way harder. There's such power in simply sitting together and talking about the truth. I mean, it was a moment of freedom for me and a moment of freedom for my mom because she'd carried so much guilt. And I was able to then carry that over into my own relationship with Christian when he was 4 or 5, about the same age as I was. Barry was in Florida at a meeting of a ministry that we were on. And that night, my father-in-law, who'd been living with us for 3 years, went upstairs to have his bath and didn't come back down. So I had Christian in his pajamas and I said, just sit there, baby, and I'm going to go check on Papa. And I knocked on his bathroom door, no answer. And eventually I opened the door and he's lying in a pool of blood. And I thought, I don't know if he's had a heart attack or I don't know if he's slipped. So I'm dialing 911. At the same time, I hear Christian coming up the stairs. And I'm like, babe, just wait. But by the time I get off the phone, he's standing there at the door. And he said, Mom, what happened to Papa? And I said, I honestly don't know, babe, but we're going to get some help. And it was this. He said, can I help? And I said, yes, you can help. And I asked him to come in and get a wash rag and put it cold water on it. I said, you just sit right beside your Papa, because I'd covered him with a towel by this point. And you just put that in Papa's forehead and just sing him that silly little song. They had this thing that every time we went out to a restaurant, my father-in-law and Christian would put their hands on their behind and sing what they called the butt dance song.
Yeah.
So my father-in-law is literally dying on the floor, and my 5-year-old son is sitting beside him singing the butt dance song to him. And my father, he actually did pass that night. But the thing that was different was at 5, I was told to go away. You can't see anything that's happening. Like all the photos of my father were taken off the wall and put in a suitcase after his suicide. And what I imagined growing up, everything, all the nightmares I had were way worse than saying to Christian, this is hard, but you can help and you can be a part of this. And I think that taught us both that you don't have to protect your child from pain. I mean, obviously there's limits. We need strong boundaries that it's all appropriate. But what I've learned is that when we try and protect our kids from all the pain, what they imagine is way worse.
Oh, that's so good. And I think that kind of plays into a little bit of mine too. When I think about things I wish I would have known, it's similar. Exactly what you're saying is that I think just teaching our kids that God's in the middle of it, even in the really hard stuff, because what I think we tend to feel, or I have later in life, when things aren't going the right direction, or I'm not seeing God answer prayer how I'd asked him to, that he is no longer with me or showing favor on me. And I think that I wish I would have known that God's favor looks so different than what the world's favor is, and that God is with us and he loves us and he is for us, even in those hardest places on the bathroom floor in the situation, or losing your dad by suicide, or all the places in my life. And I wish, and I've tried to speak this into my kids, like, it's okay in those hard places to question. It's okay to be angry, but he's still there. He hasn't walked away. And I wish I could have truly understood that. And so as we're thinking through these things with our kids, and we're thinking through these harder things, the things we wish we would have known now that we know. And so we look back, and prayer is such a critical part of it, because it's obviously that communication line that we've heard of with the Lord. And so you were doing some research and writing this book and asking, I think it sounds like, girls, like, what are some of the things you're facing? And so as parents, we know some of what they're facing, but then maybe we don't know all of it because they're not telling us everything. What did you come across that kind of surprised you, or it didn't surprise you, but what were girls facing that helped you or inspire you in writing this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as a mother of a son, my son's now 23, but a lot of my friends, Lisa Harper, Missy is, 8, 9 now, I think. And I have lots of friends who have girls in that kind of age that my heart was aching for. And I found out one of the things that surprised me was that I found a lot of young girls are really lonely. And I think that's only going to be exacerbated in 2020 with the whole COVID thing, where you can't just go hang with your friends anymore, that's not an option.
Yeah.
But I found that they were, and then the things that you and I would expect, just terrible self-image. In fact, it was interesting. Yesterday, I was interviewing Lisa Turkers for a couple of shows, and we just sat and, she and I have been friends for a long time, and we just sat and hung afterwards and compared the fact that when she was growing up, a boy in her class said something to her about, because her hair was kind of frizzy and her teeth weren't quite right, and told her that she was really ugly. And she said that little voice is still there. And I remember when I was dating a boy, and everybody thought it was such a surprise, because he was captain of the tennis team, and he was the kind of, really good looking guy. And when I was growing up, I had really bad skin. I would break out all the time, and I felt so terrible about it. But the fact that this guy dated me, I thought, I can't be as bad as I think. And then one morning when I was returning a school book to him, and the door opened and the sunlight, it was on my face, he said, I must really love you because you look awful, but I still want to be with you. And, I know that's ridiculous, because I still hear that voice sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, so I know that our girls are dealing with things because words are powerful. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes we think, well, once our kids get back home and we're speaking, words of hope or words of life over them. But I think it's great to find a way, and particularly with girls, because they'll tend to talk more easily than boys do. That's what I've found. Just, what were the things that you heard today? What were the things that were spoken over you? What do people say? But with two of my friends' daughters, the gateway to that was telling them what I heard when I was little, when I was a young teenage girl. And somehow, because they tend to see us as, like we've got our act together and, we're doing great and all that stuff, but to sit down with them and just simply say, I was sent off to a dance when I was 11 years old. It was just, our school was just up the street, and my mum, it was all she could afford because she was a widow, but the dress was awful. And what she doesn't know to this day, and she's home with Jesus now, so I guess she probably does know now, is that I didn't go to the dance. I hid behind the school in the field until it was time, the dance was over, and I could come home and tell my mom, and I'd had a great time. That somehow being vulnerable with our children helps them to be vulnerable with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, today's podcast is sponsored by our friends at Faithful Counseling. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Faithful Counseling is a solution for people seeking traditional mental health counseling who'd prefer to hear from a Christian perspective. Faithful Counseling will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. It's not a crisis line, it's not self-help, it's professional counseling done securely online. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. You'll receive timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. It's more affordable than traditional online counseling, and financial aid is available. Faithful Counseling wants you to start living a happier life today. Go to faithfulcounseling.com/pardonthemess for 10% off your first month. Again, that's faithfulcounseling.com/pardonthemess. And join the over 500,000 people taking charge of their mental health with the help of experienced professionals. How does prayer help combat some of these identity or insecurity issues that our girls are facing? Because my instinct, shocking, Sheila, is to want to talk it out, talk it to death with them. Whereas my words are helpful, but ultimately God is the only one who can secure their identity in them. So how do we make that step practically between struggling and then teaching them the struggle that they're going to face, whatever that may be, identity or other things, and that bridging that gap into prayer and telling them, convincing them, helping them understand the difference that makes?
Yeah, I was really mindful of that when I was writing the Praying Girls book. I tried to, the Devos are short. They're not so long that, they're just short. But then I would have a prayer that they could pray if they struggled to find their own words, and then space for them to write out their own feelings. Because I think developing a strong prayer life, I think we're so used to Amazon Prime where everything comes, like we finished the order and it's on the doorstep.
Yeah.
And what I've discovered in life is that life is not like that. And learning to become someone who is prayerful in everything, it's a process. And that's why I've tried to include different sections, like when you feel bad about yourself, or sometimes it's okay, like if you're angry with God. I mean, I remember that night after my father-in-law passed, and Christian did what I expected. He cried a lot, he grieved because he loved his papa. But then one day I noticed him, we'd adopted this cat the size of a horse from the Humane Society, and Christian loved this cat, but then he pushed the cat off the sofa. And so I said to him, let's go for a walk. And after a while I said to him, baby, are you angry? And he said, yes, I'm angry. And I said, well, talk to me about that. And he said, Mom, you told me that God answers prayers. And so when we were following the ambulance to the hospital, I said, God, please don't take my papa. And he did. So I'm not talking to him anymore, and I don't like him. And I said, you know what? I totally, totally get that. And I drove him to a sports store and I bought him a boxing gloves and a punching bag. And I said, when you're angry, you hit that thing till you want to collapse, but then know that you can collapse into the arms of a God who's big enough for you to be angry with him. And so, because one of the things I personally do every morning, I have this little book. It's called The Focused Life. Dr. Jeremiah gave it to me. And it goes through the Psalms and a chapter of Proverbs in 60 days. And so I go outside every morning. We live in a townhome, and I go out in the little balcony and I read 3 Psalms, and I read them out loud because somehow it's good for my ears to hear what my eyes are reading. And one of the things I say to young girls is that it's like, I'm trying to think who said this. I think it was Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, wrote this in the 4th century. But he said, whilst most of Scripture speaks to us, the Psalms speak for us. And that's why if you're angry, if you're sad, if you're depressed, if you're discouraged, if you're so happy you could burst, you will find yourself in the Psalms. That I encourage moms to find out a translation of the Bible that their girls connect with, and then maybe get them to read a Psalm every day and discover that David, who was like the best king Israel ever had, some days said, I wish I'd never been born, or what are you doing? I don't get this. So I think encouraging authenticity with our kids in the way they pray is, and sometimes, Christian's class at Trinity, his teacher in 1 grade asked me to come in and speak to the class about prayer. And I thought, well, wow, it's kind of a big subject for, kids who are like 9 and 10. But I remember telling them that morning, sometimes the greatest prayer you can pray is just 2 words, help me, or just 1 word, Jesus. And the kids wrote little notes. I'm sure the teacher made them, but to thank me afterwards. But one little girl's note stuck with me because she said, my mom and dad are going through a divorce and they can get really angry with each other. And now I know I can go into my bedroom, close the door, and just say Jesus, to say, help me. And I think helping kids know that you don't always have to, it's not about getting down on your knees or closing your eyes. It's about an ongoing conversation with the one who's always loved you and always will.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so practical and so good. And I think suffering is a hard place with prayer, like how to pray through suffering. I mean, you're watching suffering. And even this morning, I was reading the story about a pastor in Texas who he and his wife were killed in a car accident yesterday, and they have 3 small kids. And even reading that, and I was just like, Lord, he's a pastor. And, these questions in my head. And I think suffering is a hard place. And I don't think any of us this side of heaven have a complete response on what we do with that. But I'm curious, how did you speak into that with your son? And and I know in my life, I'll just share, like when I see really hard things and my kids are like, I prayed for this and it didn't happen, like you said of your son, or, how can we be praying for COVID to go away and it doesn't? I spend a lot of time saying, I don't know, but here's what I do know about God. Here's what I know about his faithfulness. Here's where I've seen him faithful in the past. Here's where without him, we would have been lost. And just going back to all those places. How have you spoken into the suffering side of prayer and not having our prayers always answered the way we want, in your own life or with your son as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge, huge issue. And I always believe that when the pain is the freshest, the words should be the fewest. Sometimes I think we
Yeah.
should have the right words at the right time. And that's not my experience. But with even just not, even with the age that my son is now, he had a friend take his own life. And they've been praying for this boy. And it's like, I think he feels some of the desperation I sometimes feel when it's not like you're praying for a parking spot at the mall. You're praying for something that really matters and something that God should care about. It's like, I remember having a conversation with a mother, and she said she's lost 2 children. And she said, I listened to you speak the other day, and what you said cannot be true. And I said, okay, well, what did I say? She said, you said that God is all powerful, and you said that God is all love. Now you're going to have to choose one. He's either all powerful, but I've buried 2 babies, so he is not love, or he's all love. I've buried 2 babies, so he wasn't powerful enough to stop it. And that is the greatest challenge of the Christian faith, to live with those 2 things, believe those 2 things, and yet still not have answers. And there's many times when I've said to my son, darling, honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the answers, and I don't know. All I can tell you is whatever you're feeling right now, you get to talk to God about that. I mean, you get to tell him, this is not fair. Why did you do this for this person who doesn't even care about you, but you didn't do this? I think the minute we think we have to be God's PR agents, we're in trouble. If we think we have to cover God in every situation, I think it's okay to say exactly what you said, which I love. I don't know, but because God is still God. God is good. God is loving. I do a thing on Thursday nights or Sunday nights when I just jump on my Facebook page, which is Sheila Walsh Connects, and I'll just invite women to, say, how can we as a community, not as me as the big high honcho, how can we as a community pray for one another? And there's been, during this COVID time, there's been so much, if God loves me, why was I not allowed to go and say goodbye to my father who died alone in the hospital? Because there's all of that stuff. And so that's why I think we need each other. We need each other more than I've ever been aware of how much we need each other. But we don't necessarily need each other's answers more than we need each other's presence in some way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So as we wrap up, I want us to do one of the little exercises. Can we do a little exercise from your Praying Girls Devotional together, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. I was looking at day 18 and I love this, and just to give people ideas of just practically how this works with our girls or boys for that matter in life. But so on day 18, it talks about writing down your 3 biggest worries, and then you write down your favorite things about God. And so let's just list, we don't have to list our own biggest worries, but let's just list what we think are 3 worries people are facing today in COVID. So let's say the health of our loved ones, right? What would be another word? What's another worry?
Finances. How are we going to pay all our bills, with everything that's going on?
And then maybe, how about just things won't return to normal?
Right.
Okay. So we'll put those 3 things out as things we're worrying about. And then you said the other thing, that the next thing to do is write down our favorite things about God. So you list 2 and I'll list 1. What's your favorite things about God?
One of probably my absolute favorite things about God is that I could come to him last night when I was exhausted and couldn't even think to pick up my Bible, or that I'm accepted all the time, no matter what's going on inside of me. What was one of your favorites?
I think just his faithfulness, even when it doesn't feel faithful. And so just that faithfulness of God in all situations, even when it isn't faithful. That's not my favorite part, I guess, but when it doesn't feel faithful, but it is. And then what's a third thing that we all love about God?
One of the things that I'm actually going to steal this from Lisa Turkish yesterday because I thought it was so good. She said that, we pray and we want an answer and we want it now. We expect. And, I said, sometimes she said, you think that God's provision say it's like bread. It's like a loaf of bread. So we're praying for that specific thing. This is what we need. And we need it now, not realizing we're walking through a field of manna, holding hands with Christ, who is the bread of life. So sometimes we get so focused on the one thing that we're praying for that we don't see everything that is around us. And to me, that's like, because God is our provider, even though the provision looks different than what we expected.
He's always our provider. Yeah. Okay. So then let's take those two lists and you say what you're asking the girls to do, but it's a good exercise for us to think about our worries in the context of what we love about God. So if we're worried about finance, what if we said we love about God? His faithfulness, right? His timing.
Absolutely.
If we're worried about health, how do we respond to that with what we love about God?
Well, then that would be his presence. I mean, I got a sweet note last weekend on the Facebook Live thing from a woman who was doing it in hospital. She was following us. She's actually in hospital and she's pretty sick. And she said, I used to talk about the faithfulness of God. And she said, but now I find myself in this place and I'm discovering God's is faithful in this hospital bed when I don't get what's going on and I'm not sure, as he was when I was at home being everything else, that in my sickness, he is with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's good. And then like our third one we talked about was just that things will maybe never be normal again. And I think all the things we talked about that are favorites, but just knowing that he's with us, we have the right and the opportunity to ask questions, to be disappointed, but that he will always walk those roads with us. But I love this exercise that we did only because it's just a good way for people to see how prayer works. Because the point in doing that, well, I'll let you say, what's the point in doing that exercise for our girls when they're praying?
It's because our feelings don't have brains. It's like we can feel all sorts of things, but it's like laying down, actually speaking out. This is what I'm worried about, and actually seeing it there on paper, and then writing out, this is what I know about God. This is what I believe about God. And when you hold them together, who God is weighs so much more. And it's almost even the exercise of writing out, it's like you're saying it into God's presence. You're saying, here's what I'm worried about right now. And one of the things I wanted girls to know is that, you've got a zit coming out. God cares about that. There's nothing in your life that God doesn't care about. And so it's just building up an understanding. It's like brick upon brick of the goodness and faithfulness of God.
That's so good. And so just, that's a good exercise for all of us, for our kids, but it's a way to move prayer from something that sometimes feels a touch esoteric to something very practical. And it goes back to what we said early on. I'll wrap it up with this, but the things I wish I would have known about God that I now know as an adult, this is one of them. I wish I would have really understood that there's a decision to be made. Am I going to believe what my mind is saying about what the truth is? Or am I going to look at the other list I have of what I know to be true about God? And we've got to make that decision. At some point in our life, our kids will make that decision. Are they going to follow what the world is saying, what our emotions are saying about truth? Are they going to follow God's truth and his word? I wish I would have known that was the decision to be made a lot earlier and made it, versus living on the cusp of God's greatness and goodness and faithfulness for so many years of my life. So good word, Sheila Walsh, on all of this. And it's practical and it's helpful and it's good for moms. It's good for girls. And I have sons that I can't wait to implement some of this with as well. So thank you.
I just love talking with you. You're so real. You're just right there where we are.
You're so sweet. Well, we're neighbors. All good, Sheila. We're going to start hanging out every day after COVID, okay?
Yay.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. And everyone, we're going to link it in podcast notes. Praying Girls Devotional, 60 days to shape your heart and grow your faith through prayer with Sheila Walsh. And one more time on, if people want to catch up with you, what's your social?
Sheila Walsh Connects on Facebook and just Sheila Walsh 1 on Instagram.
Got it. All right. Thanks. Sheila Walsh. She's awesome. I always love having her on, and she feels like such a close friend because she's so easy to talk to. So to the extent I get too casual and random with her, I apologize in advance, but she's so fun just to get a little glimpse into her life. But she's just a huge encourager on prayer. She's done that for me so many different ways and times. I love reading her things because her books encourage me and bring me back to the importance of spending time in prayer. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll check out her book, Praying Women is awesome, but then also Praying Girls. I'll link it in the podcast notes. So thankful that you're with us today. We know your days are busy, so as always, thank you for joining us as we pardon the mess.